Hey everybody, welcome to the October webinar. My name is Dwayne Ellis. I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means for me is that it's almost been 7 years since I felt the need to use any mind-altering drugs to change the way that I feel. Simply put, recovery has awarded me the opportunity to live my truth and be proud of it. And we all have a voice. But welcome to the October webinar where Larissa Guerrero, Jeremy Moore, and Maggie Pustinger will be talking about database analysis. But before I turn it over to them, there's a few housekeeping guidelines we got to go over. First, those who stay for the entirety will earn 1.5 CEUs. When submitting your CEUs, it's helpful to keep track of them, usually by month, topic, and panelist. So for this one, the month would be October. The topic, you could just put data analysis. And for the panelists, you could put GCSA and Emory Centers. I'll repeat that again at the end and put it in the chat. You'll receive a certificate for this training no later than the end of next week from Tia Morgan. You will be muted throughout the entirety of this presentation, but you can put your questions in the chat or Q&A box and we'll try to answer them all. And there's going to be opportunities to speak as well, so feel free to engage. And this will be interactive, but without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators. Thank you for doing it.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see some faces haven't seen in a while and names haven't seen in a while. Please feel free to put in the chat, just say hi to all your fellow CARES, maybe what area you are in, and then what CARES cohort you are. And so, like DJ said, today we'll be talking about data collection and evaluation. And we have a special guest from the Emory Centers for Public Health Training and Technical Assistance joining us today, and she'll introduce herself in just a moment here. So my name is Larissa Guerrero, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is that it's been 8 years since I've used any drugs or alcohol. And that is a huge, huge deal to me because for a long time, I thought somebody like me wouldn't be able to find recovery, let alone live a meaningful life in recovery. So due to my recovery, I've been able to create a life that I actually want to live today. I was able to graduate with my master's in public health earlier this year. I vote, I pay taxes. My wife and I just purchased our first home last year, and we get to spend our weekends hiking and traveling with our 2 dogs, Ace and Sika there. They're my favorite, they make me smile. But most importantly, I have a sense of peace in my life today. And I speak out about my recovery because I want everyone to have the opportunity to get and stay well. One of the greatest blessings I have today is that I get to work with an incredible group of really fierce advocates for recovery. I serve as the Director of Peer Services at Georgia Council on Substance Abuse, and I get to work with 5 different peer recovery support services programs with 24 peer recovery coaches. And one of those coaches, who's actually the AUD program manager, is presenting with us today. He's been a hugely outstanding asset to our AUD MAP program and is a big reason that it's been as successful as it is. So now I'm going to pass it on to Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larissa. Hello, everybody. Very exciting to see such a great turnout for this. It's an exciting topic. My name is Jeremy Moore. I am a person in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is that on February 4th of 2023, I will celebrate 10 years without the use of substances or anything to change the way that I feel. It also means that this next week I celebrate 46 years on this planet, which is not something I intended to do. I didn't want to do it. I didn't plan on doing it. But today I'm super grateful that I did. It also means that I get to be a good son. My mom doesn't have to wonder about me at night anymore. I get to be a good brother, a good friend, a good employee. I get to be somebody that people can count on. When I say I'm going to do something, I do. I show up. I'm also a contributing member of society. I pay taxes, I vote, and I live my recovery out loud because I want to show others that recovery is real, it's attainable, and that every person afflicted with substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder is deserving and capable of achieving long-term recovery. I've been working with the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse for a little over 3 years now, And a little over a year ago, we launched our alcohol use disorder program, and I became the manager of that program. And we've been working with the Emory Centers for Public Health Education and Technical Assistance during that time. And I have learned a tremendous amount about data collection and evaluation. So I'm excited to get the opportunity to share that with you guys today. And I'm super glad that Maggie was able to join us today. She's the pro. Without her help, we would have been lost. Honestly, I had no idea what went into data collection and evaluation. And hopefully you guys are going to be able to take away some great stuff from this webinar today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Postinger. I work with Emory Centers for Public Health Training and Technical Assistance as an evaluator. I'm really excited that Larissa and Jeremy asked me to be here today. I love evaluation. It is what I do every single day, but it's also how I think just in everyday life. I also graduated with my master's in public health from Emory this past year. And now I work with them full time. In my free time, I like to be outside and do anything I can outside and hang out with my dog. She is one of the biggest joys of my life. That's just a little bit about me, but Larissa is going to talk a little bit about data collection and the importance of that. And then I will spend a little bit of time discussing one small component of evaluation with you all this afternoon. And I'm really looking forward to that.
All right, so a quick roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. Like Maggie said, first we'll start out with why data collection even matters and why is evaluation important. And then we'll go into how that applies to us as CARES. Because we know if our voice isn't at the table, sometimes the recovery voice is missed. So how does what we're talking about today apply to us as CARES? And then Maggie's going to provide us with a tiny little snapshot of Evaluation 101. And please feel free to put any questions in the chat, stop us, and hopefully we can make this a conversational webinar. And with that, we are going to start with the question. So first and foremost, why did data collection and evaluation matter? So if you can put that in the chat or unmute yourself.
Because it helps us to see what's working and not working.
Yeah, I've also learned that it massively helps with funding if we're like doing grants, anything grant related, when we can show an increase of efficacy or any kind of increase in numbers, it's huge. Yeah.
Heather Woodard said statistics and progress. Aloya said to measure progress. I got a couple people saying funding for sure. To share important information with community partners, tracking the needle, whole bunch of good stuff in the chat.
And if it's not recorded, it didn't happen.
Awesome, I love that. If it's not recorded, it didn't happen. So how do we actually keep track of everything that we're doing and get the funding to be able to continue expanding peer support services? Awesome.
Records for advocating, funding, tracking, help quality improvement. I'm seeing funding a lot.
Okay, so as many of you mentioned, it has an effect on funding and being able to provide more peer support services. So if we think back to the early years of CARES and peer support in general, there are a lot of leaders like Neil and Sherry Jenkins Tucker and George and Larry Fricks and all them that advocated for the expansion of peer services and including lived experience at the table. And they'd go and they'd speak with legislators or behavioral health leaders and basically anybody else that would listen to them. And they talk about the benefits of including peers in the field, but they didn't just talk about how they felt like it would make a difference. They actually use data to back up their ideas and advocacy. Because for the most part, hopefully, people don't invest money just based on feelings. They invest money based on facts and evidence, right? So an example that we have, I think I'm going to pass it to Jeremy here to talk about this
Yep.
example that we have.
Yep, so many of you guys mentioned funding. So data is very important to obtain funding for new programs. One example that we can use is in 2021, the Emergency Department Peer Program was no longer able to see peers with alcohol use disorder due to grant restrictions. The chart that you see here in front of you represents the data collected prior to the new restriction. These numbers indicate the number of encounters we had with peers, and they are broken down by substance abuse. So green indicates alcohol, blue overdose, purple opioids, gray methamphetamine, and so on. Our data allowed us to see the magnitude of the impact that this cut would have on our peers. As you can see here, a very large number of peers we serve were peers with alcohol use disorder, and they would no longer be able to access peer support services in our emergency rooms. So we use this data to write a new grant for separate funding specific to peers with AUD. In addition, we were able to review our qualitative data, our coach encounter notes specifically, and identify necessary components that would help ensure that our peers with AUD could access services. Our data also showed that we had peers who were presenting in the emergency department many times each year, and there was a pattern of specific barriers they faced. One was lack of transportation. Another was access to healthcare outside of the emergency room. Another was a safe place to live, and also medication. We use this data to develop our alcohol use disorder program, which now, in addition to providing peer support services for all AUD peers entering our emergency rooms, we can also offer a comprehensive medication-assisted treatment program to a select number of peers each year, which includes all of these components and more. So if it wasn't for the data that we had previously collected when that funding was cut to see the alcohol use disorder peers, we wouldn't have a leg to stand on for asking for this separate funding. But because we had the data, we had the notes, we had the information we needed, we could present a compelling case to the state for the need for funding for a separate program to make sure that those peers weren't left out. Next slide.
Another example too is a lot of you all probably remember this, but in 2020, there was a big budget scare where the governor said that all state agencies needed to cut their budgets by a substantial amount. And one of the things that they put on the table to cut was the $4 million in RCO funding. So with that, we had everybody kind of teamed up together and put together this advocacy effort. And big part of that included looking at data. So we created this compiled list of the number of individuals that were being served at each of the RCOs across the state, and it was tens of thousands of people. And so we took that information, the number of people being served, and everybody started blasting their legislators, letting them know, hey, if you support this funding cut, it's going to result in this many of your constituents losing access to services. Everyone also got together, held car rallies, went up to the Capitol, sent out mass emails. There's a whole social media effort behind it too. So basically that data was the foundation of it. And then the advocacy efforts followed that data. And with that, they were able to hear the message that all of us as CARES and all the people in our communities were putting out and decided against cutting that funding. So it made a huge difference being able to say this number of people are going to lose services. So when it comes to, I don't know, 5 o'clock, 5:30, whatever time your shift ends, you don't really feel like putting in that last note because it's been a long day, maybe had some really emotional encounters. Even one single note a day, it can make a really big difference. So I just want to keep harping on the importance of including that information, even if it doesn't seem like it's the fun part of your job. And Jeremy, you're on mute.
Me?
You're still on mute, Jeremy.
Yeah, it keeps muting itself back. So without data collection and documentation, there is no evidence of our work. Somebody said that during the sharing portion. If you're a peer coach, you are the single most important person in the data collection process. Without you providing services and keeping accurate records of your encounters and writing thorough notes, there is no data to evaluate or advocate for funding and the expansion of peer support services. The data you enter into your organization's database is so much more than just the annoying, boring task that you have to complete before the end of your shift. It's not about just checking boxes. In fact, it's likely that at some point down the road, someone is going to be reading through your notes and data and relying on that to make big decisions that impact the future of peer support. It is imperative that you keep this in mind every time you sit in front of the computer, and your documentation is important. Next slide. So a couple of the ways that I use data collection in a supervisory role and how we review data collection. Regular one-on-one check-ins with coaches to review data related to their work and cross-referencing the different collection methods ensures that I'm able to catch errors and oversights in the data collection process early and have time to make the necessary corrections. The last thing you want to do is find the critical data is missing or incorrect when you're ready to use it. Data should be collected in real time and reviewed often. I personally rely on encounter notes and data to evaluate the performance and quality of services our coaches are providing to peers. I can't always be with our coaches when they conduct encounters, but I can, however, get a really good picture of how the encounter went by reading thorough notes. I'm able to identify patterns and areas for additional training and support to ensure that our coaches are equipped with all of the tools that they need to be great coaches. After all, great coaches have great outcomes, and their data collection makes it real and tangible. Data is how we show that peer support really works. I can also monitor productivity and keep an eye on the workload each coach is carrying. Sometimes data collection can tell you that a member of your team needs some self-care time. Making sure that your team has effective data collection tools is also imperative. For new projects, it may take several updates to the collection tools and methods before the collection process becomes more manageable and less cumbersome on the team. I know that for me personally, our first year of data collection was a little bit all over the place. It took several changes to get those tools honed in to where that they were efficient and not so cumbersome on the staff. And after our first year, I had learned so much that I made major drastic changes to the data collection tools. And today I feel pretty comfortable about those tools and how we're collecting data, and it's pretty easy to keep up with. So making sure that you have the tools that your team needs to collect the data is one of the most important pieces for me, and that it can be reviewed often. And you can cross-reference and make sure that everything's there and everybody's putting the data that they're supposed to put in so you have it when you need it.
Yeah, this has been a huge learning process for us, even starting with the basics of how do we make sure that we're protecting our peers' information? Are we using a database that allows us to keep their information private and secure? So everything from that to ensuring that the data is entered accurately. There's so much that goes into this process. And we feel like we're at a fairly steady point right now, but we always know there's still a lot of room for growth. And where we're at now, it's allowed us to be able to see where we're at and be able to adjust the direction of some of our programs. And then with that, also redistributing resources. So we have one grant that houses 2 programs under it. And we're able to look at the number of encounters that we've had and see, okay, our warm line is way overburdened right now. We don't have the capacity to meet all the calls that are coming in. So we took some positions from our emergency department program. They've been down since COVID. So we took some positions from there and applied it onto our warm line staff. So it really helps in being able to make decisions for programs and making sure that we're making the best use of the resources that we're giving. I see a question, what data software are you using? So we use a couple, unfortunately, we have to use a couple different ones right now because different grants have different requirements. For our SOR, we're still on WITS. So we've been using that for our emergency department and our warm line, we're using WITS. For the ones that we've had a choice in and the funding available, we're using Recovery Link, which is from Unity Recovery up in Pennsylvania. It's an RCO. They created this database, or they call it an electronic recovery records system. So it's HIPAA compliant, it's secure. Since it was created by an RCO, it's really peer focused. It includes things like recovery capital scale in it. It looks at a lot of different social determinants. We're hoping to eventually get all of our programs and all of our organization over to Recovery Link. It provides like data analysis right there. So you can pick you can select a program. You can say, I want to look at the number of people that showed up in the emergency department, had a certain number of encounters, and what is the rate of their housing stability. So you can view different factors and get an analysis of different factors. So we've been loving Recovery Link lately. We tried RDP before, but we found that wasn't the best fit for us. So that's where we've ended up, is on Recovery Link.
Yeah, I will add to that. We also use several other tools. We use JotForms to collect data. We use shared spreadsheets in OneDrive. Little side note on that, if you do use shared spreadsheets in OneDrive, you need two-factor authentication to make sure that those sheets are protected if they have identifiers on them. But really comprehensive spreadsheets, JotForms, Recovery Link notes, Recovery Link reports, and feedback from our peers. So we use a lot of different tools in the AUD MAT program to collect data. So it's coming from a lot of different sources and at specific intervals. So multiple tools may be necessary depending on what data you're collecting and evaluating.
Could I ask real quick, like with what it is that you're doing, or with, like I heard you say, with a MAT program, like, are you able to not do anything that has to be HIPAA compliant? And because it doesn't have to be HIPAA compliant, you can use these? Does that make sense? Like, are you tracking data that is anonymous in a confidential kind of way?
We do track data that is anonymous in a confidential way that can be used strictly just by the numbers without identifying any of the participants. But we also use data that must be HIPAA compliant because it does use identifiers and their individual experience with the program.
And you have different software for that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can add to that too. So when we first started, we were, since we're not required to follow HIPAA, we didn't in the beginning. We would just collect, first name and last initial. And then we had some people come in, some grad students wanted to do an evaluation on our program. So they tried to go through our data, but it was really hard because then we couldn't match up the names and be able to look at outcomes, because there's a lot of similar first names. When you're seeing thousands of people, you're going to have a lot of the same first name and last initial. So we had to go back through some of our data sets and basically audit that, sitting down with the hospital team, auditing all of our data. So I think if we were to do it again, we would have just started with HIPAA from the beginning, and it would have saved us like lots of hours of having to audit that. But on the other hand, if there are programs where you might not necessarily ever need to audit that, then go for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll just fit this in real quick. So I'm loving when you're saying you like stumbled through it in the beginning, because like same. But we found a really beautiful way of doing like unique identifiers. So it's like the first initial, last initial, birth year, and then like race and sex or gender identity. So all of those, but at the same time, we were also able to like be able to hit those demographics at the same time. And there's never a double of a unique identifier. So it took a while to find that, but it was a beautiful way of doing exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's an awesome idea.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
I found it from other harm reductionists. It's like a very normal thing for harm reduction data collection, but I can share that more later. But it's like, it is really, it's perfect and it doesn't take a lot of time, and they don't get uncomfortable either because it's not too personal.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if you can, I don't know if it's a link to it, Riley, or any way you can share it with the group, because there's so many different ways to do this, but that sounds like a good way to do it too.
I'll I'll try to put it in the chat. It'll take a minute though, because it's like explained. Or you know what? Can I just send you an email that's like well described, and then you can send it out to everyone?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think if anybody else has other ideas that have been working well for them, we can just send out emails. Because there's really no one right or wrong answer to this. So the more ideas that we can share, the better. Yeah, thanks, Riley. Edmund asked, is Recovery Link usable in a recovery house setting for data collection? I would think so. You use it more on the day-to-day than I do, Jeremy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it absolutely could be used for a recovery house. It might be a bit expensive depending on how big your recovery sober home is and how many residents you're housing. It is a little on the expensive side, but it could be used in the recovery sober home setting.
Okay, so a little bit more about why this matters outside of funding is that it allows you to measure impact. So it, like, I guess when we started too, we just felt like, we know it's working because we see it every day and we hear these stories and we know that peer support's working, but actually having data and a plan set up to assess that data allows us to objectively see the impact that we're making. And it can also allow somebody to bring new ideas to the table. So say you want to try out a new idea within your organization, you're much more likely to be able to make that happen if you have the data on hand to support your idea, as well as a plan to demonstrate to your supervisor the impact of your idea once it's implemented. So if you're maybe flying solo in an organization as a CARES, or peer support is relatively new idea within an organization, using data to back up an idea you have of a change you want to make, and then also setting up a plan to evaluate that might help in that process of trying to make some positive changes within your organization. And one thing, so as CARES, we want to be really careful when we're talking about success in peer services, because success looks so different depending on the individual. And each individual really gets to define their own success. So for some people, it might be not shooting up heroin anymore, but maybe drinking occasionally on the weekends. They define that as success. Or for others, might be total abstinence or getting custody back of their kids, or even just finding a stable situation. And when we were working through our evaluation plan for our AED program with Maggie's team, this conversation came up many times. And so what we did to make sure to include each peer's own specific definition of success as part of the evaluation plan, we included peer interviews. So we had some thoughts on it, some number measures like using recovery capital scale and audit scores, but it was really important to us that we include these peer interviews so that each individual person that we're seeing can be able to say whether or not they thought that the program was helpful for them. And now, unless you have anything else you want to add here, Jeremy, I'm going to pass it on to Maggie.
I would just say that that is a really good point that you just made. And when we determine successful outcomes, when a peer has reached their stated goals, they can participate anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months. It really is a successful completion in the AUD MAP program is 100% based on whether or not that peer has met their own stated goals. And they may be different goals than another peer. So the measure of success is individual. And one person may complete the program in 3 months. Another person may complete it in 6 months. And there is no set standard of you have to do all of these things in order to complete the program. We take their original goals. We meet with them regularly. They go to therapy. They say they've met their goals. We talk to them about those goals, and we consider their success based on an individual basis. So I just wanted to reinforce that. That's really important.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I guess we will pass it on to you now, Maggie.
Great. Yeah, so like Larissa and Jeremy were talking about, evaluation is great because it lets us define our own measures of success, which is really important, and that every program looks different, and success also, how we define success can change from program to program, or from individual to individual, or even from day to day for those individuals. And evaluation lets us know how these programs are working and how we can improve them or make changes for the next time that might not have come up. I think a really great example of this is in the AD program. In peer interviews, it came up that a number of peers wanted more interaction with their peers, and they were getting like that great support. They loved the network they're developing and the people they were working with, but talking with other peers who were also in the program. And that was something that came up a couple of times and is going to be implemented. So I think it's really fun to see that in action, and it's a great way to understand how the programs can be strengthened. Obviously, evaluation is very complex and encompasses a lot of different things. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about process and outcome evaluations and how we can start to frame our thinking in these questions we're asking and the conversations we're having to collect meaningful data that we can share with bosses or the people who are providing funding, all of those things. If you can go to the next slide, Larissa. So just kind of a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about, do a little bit of an introduction to evaluation, talk from your perspective what evaluation is. I'm loving the engagement that I'm seeing already. Definitely want to keep that up because I think that this will be really meaningful if we can have like some tangible examples of what this might look like in your programs. Then I'm going to go through some logic models and evaluation question overview to help set the stage, and then we'll spend a majority of the time talking about process and outcome evaluations. And I'm going to try and leave some time for questions. And that's kind of it. So next slide. I want to start off with some good engagement. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning, like why evaluation and data collection is important. But what are some things that come to mind when you hear someone say evaluation?
You can raise your hand or unmute yourself. Kathy Sweat says, check up. Michael Mint says performance. I got a couple performances. Jennifer Hughes says the overall picture. Would anybody like to share?
Just a hint, there's no wrong answer.
Candace
Makes me think of
Savannah. Oh, okay.
what's going right and what could be better.
Candace Savannah says check progress and performance. Sabrina says the outcome of your work. That's a good answer. That's actually what I was thinking.
Honestly, like first thing that comes to mind for me, it like gives me anxiety. Like, you know, back in the day, you'd have to like get an eval to see if you needed to go to like treatment or DUI school or something like that, you know. But I think really like that it's such a broad thing. Like, what is it that's being evaluated, right? Like, is it the entire program? Is it the like, are we gauging the effectiveness of what it is that's happening? but that's really like, or evaluation. Those of us that like did spend time or still are in 12-step culture, I think of like when you take a inventory, like you are inventorying what is there, right? Like you are evaluating what it is that's being done and what is coming out of it, trying to speak in like a large umbrella kind of way, but I think it depends on what we're evaluating.
Jessica says observation. Monica says just looking at the facts, progress and weak area checkups. I personally think evaluation, when I hear the word, I think about the fact that not one size fits all. So when you do I think about recovery too, because what works for one person doesn't work for the other person. And just one size doesn't fit all, and really figuring out as many pathways, as many resources as we could provide to the recovery community. And every voice counts through evaluation.
Yeah, it's exactly spot on. We heard a lot of different things in the chat and out loud, and all of them are right. Evaluation is everywhere, it's everything. And I love that Dwayne and Riley both brought in like your real life context, because I know for me, working in the evaluation field, I see evaluation everywhere. And I think that's a really great way to frame it, because it is all encompassing. It's overwhelming. It can be daunting, and it can kind of feel like someone's coming in to tell you what you're doing wrong and how you need to fix it. But I also think you can look at it on the flip side. It's how we're getting better. It's how we're improving. And without having that like scary, daunting thing that's going to happen, we can't improve, we can't change and evolve. And so it really is everywhere, and it's everything. And we're going to talk about such a small part of that today. And I think it's important that we're constantly asking ourselves in our programs that we're working on, what went right, what went wrong, and then readjusting accordingly. Are we doing something that's working really well and we need to keep doing it exactly how we're doing it? Or is there a new component that we can add that will help people out? That's what evaluation and quality improvement is. It's an ongoing cycle. And I'm going to just hopefully show you that this is just kind of an automatic way that your brain thinks. To some degree, you're already doing it. I'm seeing a lot of that in the chat and out loud. And so we're going to talk about process and outcome evaluation, which are two pieces of the puzzle. And when Larissa and Jeremy asked me if I was interested in doing this, that was kind of automatically where my brain jumped to, that what can I do in like 45 minutes to help set the stage so that you can go talk to your supervisors or start implementing like a little bit more data collection, evaluation components into your everyday work. All right, can we go to the next slide? All right, so this is the CDC's evaluation framework. This is a pretty widely accepted evaluation framework. And as you can see, it has 6 stages that function in a cyclic manner, because evaluation is an ongoing process. You can always start evaluation. We like to start evaluation when the program begins so that we can be in there from step 1, but it's never too late to start evaluation and kind of jump in and continue to evaluate and update your program as time goes on. And then if you can click again, Larissa. So today we're going to just focus on, oh yeah, can you go back? Yeah, we're just going to focus on that one piece, that evaluation design, and into this one piece of this 6-part cycle is where that process and outcome evaluation fits. Okay, now you can go to the next slide. And this is a logic model. This is the first thing evaluators do when they're starting a new project. I know that we worked with the AUD project to develop a logic model that kind of shows this is going to act as your roadmap to understand how every component of the program fits together. Because you're going to have those community members, those inputs, those people who are funding you, your boss, everyone who's engaging in the program, and they're going to fit in with all of those activities that you're incorporating. So whether that's the transportation access that AUD the AD program incorporates. And that is going to just continue to feed in and just allow you to see the outputs. So the outputs for the transportation might look like the number of people who took transportation services. And those feed into your short-term, your intermediate, and your ultimate long-term, or that big impact that your program is trying to make. So a logic model is a really great place to start because it shows us how we're going to evaluate each aspect of the program. And it allows us to make these changes and improvements to the program at every step, from planning through when the program is in full swing and functioning at its full capacity. So if your program, for example, is focused on peer engagement, you might at the beginning of your program form some sort of focus group in your planning stage to understand what type of activities your peers want to engage in. So that's going to be in that input area of your logic model. And then actually, can we go to the next slide as well? Yeah, great. So here, this is the same headings that were found in the logic model, just broken down into a few stages. And if you can just click, it's going to circle the first 3 steps. So those resources or inputs, the activities and the outputs, those are all going to be what we call process evaluation. And then your outcomes and the ultimate impact are the outcome evaluation. So evaluation can be broken into these 2 different pieces, and you're going to evaluate them or plan, ask questions a little bit differently depending on where they fall in your process. So process evaluation allows us to understand how well our plan is working and what changes we need to make it work even better. And then outcome evaluation helps us understand the effects of our program and if it's working the way that we want it to. A really good analogy that I like to think of when I'm thinking of process and outcome evaluations is that in a restaurant. So in a restaurant, the chef is performing a process evaluation. They're testing the food every step of the way, changing the heat they're cooking it at, adding more salt or pepper, all of those things in order to make like a really good meal. And then the patron at the restaurant, they're doing the outcome evaluation. They're eating the food. They're saying, yeah, that was really good. I'm going to recommend that all my friends come here. Or they're saying, that was not great. I'm going to leave a bad review. So those are kind of the 2 big things that we're going to focus on today. Next slide, please. So just based on that, can you think of like one component of, or a few components that might be involved in process evaluation? What kind of questions we might ask? What kind of things we're looking to understand? And you feel free to unmute yourself or just put it in the chat.
Oh, we got Jessica. What are you currently doing? That is the question that's her key component. What are you currently doing? Anybody else? Anybody want to unmute and share? Y'all a little quiet today.
I know
Matt?
we,
Go ahead,
sorry, if
Riley.
there's someone else, I don't want to monopolize.
No, go ahead.
We use it for demographics, and just like I said earlier, demographics is a huge thing. It helps us. We do different kinds of stuff, but demographics is huge. One of those things I didn't understand in the beginning, and not just like who's coming in, but how often are they coming in? What services are they receiving when they are coming in? There's a multitude of things there. But definitely, just like I said earlier, we were able to figure out how to get the demographics into the unique ID so that we could track those things at the same time as counting who is coming in the door. And we'll have things too, like we'll have 209 unique identifiers that came in a month, but we had 530 visitors, right? Which means that many of those came in multiple times. And all that stuff's really important to know.
Thank you, Riley. Monica says what's working. Aloya says the target area. Michael Mint says gauging the experience. Marissa says planning. Aloya says time of day. Marissa Cody says stakeholders. I was going to say strength and weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly. These are kind of your like beginning planning stages, the number of people that you hope to have at your program, the types of programs that you're going to put on, the curriculum that you're developing, or the guest speakers that you're inviting. Those sorts of things are going to be the process evaluations. So if you can go to the next slide. Yes, so there are 7 buckets that you're going to consider when you're thinking about process evaluation. And most things that you're going to evaluate in the process evaluation can fit into these 7 key buckets. So the first one is going to be the context, which this is the larger environmental influences that are playing into your program. So I'm really going to ask for a lot of participation now. I want to hear what this looks like in your program. So what context are you considering? And how can you ask these questions in the space that you work in?
Catherine Hardy, I see you smiling. Would you like to share?
I'm just trying to think of the context of, well, when I hear context, I think of our mission, and our mission is to establish, promote, and support quality long-term recovery. And, I think about our target audience, our target participation, the services that we offer, our goals. But we don't do a lot of data collection, which is why I'm in this training. So hence I've been very quiet because I'm trying to learn. But
Yeah,
thank you for calling on me.
So I have a question for you, Catherine. Since you're already talking, so can you first tell me a little bit about your program or the area that you work in? Who is your target audience? And what's the goal?
We are in Statesboro, and we have a really big recovery community because we have a lot of different treatment centers here. So we've really targeted establishing a relationship pre-treatment, during treatment, and post-treatment, so that we can support them in their long-term recovery journey.
Okay, great. So I think a really good question that you could ask would be, how does the location or the time in treatment? So is the participant pre-treatment, in treatment, or post-treatment? How does that influence their engagement in the program? So thinking about, for environment, this is the place that a person's in. So are they in a treatment facility? Are they in their own home? Are they in, support groups? And how that impacts whatever the ultimate goal of your program is. So that's kind of how we're going to focus on context. The next process evaluation piece is reach. So this is the portion of your intended audience that participates. So kind of going back to Catherine's example is, how many people are pre-treatment or pre-recovery? How many people are in the middle of their recovery? And how many people are not in any sort of program? Does anyone else have any good examples of how we could evaluate that reach? I'm gonna stop talking.
I will say one thing that I think is really cool about data collection is like, it shows us not only who we're serving, but who we are not serving, which I think is wildly important. And not just with demographics, but I could go down a big rabbit hole there. But I think like I used to look through these lenses that it was like, oh, we're going to create this great thing and would create the thing, not even knowing if it was really needed. Right. But what I've really learned over the years is that like there are holes in services, there are holes in it's like where people fall through the gaps, right? And like data collection shows us that. Or I mean, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but like are we a predominantly white program that's only serving white people? Like we need to look at that. Right?
Yeah.
Like there's a multitude of things that data collection can show us what we're missing and where the needs are that maybe we really should be focusing on.
Yeah, exactly. So like to Riley's point, if we have our intended audience is all people in treatment, and we know that a certain percentage identifies as white or African American, what percentage of our audience, if we're intending to reach everyone, what percentage are we actually reaching? All right, and then next we have dose delivered. So this is the number of intended program units delivered or provided. So does anyone have an example of what this could look like in your program? Or if you don't know, and we can have another conversation like Catherine and I had, talk to me a little bit about your program and we can figure out what this might look like for you. You can also put it in the chat.
To me, it seems like that's the number of services you offered that month. You know, like we have a schedule. I work in a treatment center. It's a residential treatment center. We also have outpatient. But yeah, it's like the number of times we gave them the opportunity to engage, basically.
Exactly. And then kind of going right off of that, Brittany, dose received, that's the number of people who are engaging with your materials. So this is going to look a lot like a count. Like you're going to keep track of the number of programs that you provided and the number of people who showed up, which I know at the very beginning, a lot of people were talking about funding. This is what funders love to see. They love to see the number of programs that you put on and how many people come and how it's reached, how many people are reached. All right, we have some good stuff going on in the chat as well. So we have maybe non-working class against working class, cultural diversity. So these are all things that we can definitely look at during our process evaluation and kind of understand the numbers of people that we're reaching and the context. All right, and now we're going to go into fidelity, which is this is whether or not the intervention or the program was delivered as planned. This one can be a little bit trickier at times. And I think typically a good way to evaluate fidelity is to have, if you're planning on doing like a class, a webinar series, something like that, you might say, these are our objectives for the webinar. Did we reach them? Our objectives for this webinar today are to talk about how you can incorporate data collection into your work. So Larissa or Jeremy might have a checklist of, did we cover all of these topics? And that's a really good way to evaluate the fidelity of the program. All right, and then implementation is the extent to which the intervention has been implemented and received as planned. So does anyone have an example we can talk about in your work on how we might evaluate the implementation of your program, or what questions we might ask?
I'm not entirely sure if this is what you're going for, but like we're a harm reduction program and we have a syringe service program. And one, like a beautiful piece of data is that people who like active chaotic drug users who access syringe service programs are 5 times more likely to engage in treatment, right? So in the beginning, we were doing just the regular data to count our numbers and this, that, and the other. And then we were like, like how many folks that are actually coming to us are going for treatment, right? And then we like created another thing under the umbrella to be able to count that, to be able to count like how many folks not just are reaching out, because a lot of them will reach out, but that doesn't mean they follow through. But if they do, just all the different like things there. I don't know if that's like going down a rabbit hole inside of another rabbit hole, but it was definitely something that we found helpful that you wouldn't really necessarily think about.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing a lot in the chat about surveys, and that's how we can figure out if our program is being implemented as planned. So like spot on, you know, are people, is the outcome that we're intending from these programs. All right. And then the last one is kind of a two-parter. So we have recruitment, which is procedures used to bring participants in. Can anyone think of, it's not on the slide, but we have the recruitment component. What do you think is important after we recruit participants?
Like, I guess if you're recruiting, would it be the follow-up?
Keeping them in the program. Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of how many people we have come into our program, how many people graduate or successful completions, and then how many people fall through the cracks, which is still really important. Sometimes we don't want to collect the data that shows that our program isn't working exactly how we want it to, but that's how we find those gaps and those holes and identify how we retain even more participants. All right, we can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you everyone for your great participation. So these are some really important things to consider when you're going through process evaluation. And process evaluation is that component that sets the stage. It's not as glamorous as understanding, did my program achieve the long-term goal that we have set? But it's really important for setting that foundation to make sure that your program is going to be successful and is going to be continuous. So 3 really important things to remember are to understand the program and how it's supposed to work. A lot of you are clearly showing me that you know these are your programs and you know them inside and out, and you know what that outcome is supposed to be. And that's really important for breaking down and asking those really like specific questions. Next, we have defining the purpose for the process evaluation. At the end of the day, what do you want to get away from this evaluation? Do you want your program to be even more successful? Do you want it to be sustainable? There are so many things that we can consider. And really, when you're thinking about your program and you know, like you're doing the planning stage of it, what is your intention with that planning stage? And then consider what could impact the implementation of the program. So think about those like outside factors outside of your control, and how can we kind of use those to our advantage to learn for next time. So is it going to be that you have funding withdrawn, or you have issues with recruitment or retention? Any of these things are going to help us in that second half, that outcome evaluation, and with the longevity of our program. All right, next slide. So there are 6 steps to process evaluation. And after this, I will get into outcome evaluation. But very clear. I've spent a lot of time talking about process evaluation. We can see how important it is to really set that foundation and set that stage for a really good program, and to understand why our program is successful or isn't. So step one is to describe the program. This is going to be the purpose of your program, any underlying theories that you're using, past programs, and then you're also going to look at your objectives and your goals, strategies, how you're going to get there, the expected outcomes, impacts, and goals that you have of your program. Step two is going to be specific, describing the delivery. So this is specific strategies. So is it making connections with people? Is it providing transportation like the AUD program does, or providing that medication assisted treatment? Then different activities and staff behaviors. Step three is developing some potential questions. So drafting any and all questions, anything you can think of that might be helpful to collect your data, ask lots of questions. And then you're going to organize these questions by intervention components. So for example, say a component of your program is providing a training. Any questions that's related to the training. So maybe it's the number of trainings that have been conducted, the topics of the trainings, the number of people who attended. Yes, but I'm seeing in the chat, find out from your participants what they need. And that is very, very important. And a lot of that is going to be even before, when you're like in that describe the program. But I also think it's important to remember to always circle back to what your participants need. At the end of the day, it's a program for them, for their improvement. And that's that quality improvement component. And that's that like cyclic evaluation process. Everything always comes back. It's always engaging those participants and engaging the community members as people who are really important to the program. All right, so then the fourth step is to determine the methods. So consider any resources that you have or any resource limitation. Some methods of data collection take a lot longer. So quantitative, those counts, tracking in a spreadsheet, something like that might take a little less manpower than doing some sort of qualitative in-depth interview with your participants. And you're going to get different types of data from that. Then you're going to look at your data collection tools and measures, which we had a great conversation about at the beginning of the webinar. And then a lot of this depends on the context of the program, you know, considering this HIPAA compliance, and do your program participants want to be interviewed? Do they have the time to be interviewed? And, you know, is it a vulnerable population that maybe them being interviewed puts them at a higher risk? These are all really important things to consider. And then other things to get for considering your program is how long is the program, how many participants they're going to be, what are is your scheduling going to look like, and then will evaluation disrupt program operations? So evaluation really tries to work hand in hand with your program rather than working like fighting against your program. And so that's really important to consider because you don't want, at the end of the day, the program success and the ultimate outcomes are really what is most important. And then the sixth step of process evaluation is finalizing that plan. So measuring the minimum of the process evaluation components, documenting recruitment procedures, describing the context of the interventions, and then any questions that should be addressed for each component of the intervention, like we blocked them out in step 3. All right, and then we can go on to the next slide. And you can click again. And for this, I'm now going to talk about that second half of the logic model, which is the outcome evaluation. And this is understanding the effects of the program. Or in that analogy about the restaurant, it's those patrons at the restaurant who are eating their entire meal and assessing it. All right, next slide. And we've talked about this a little bit, but feel free to put it in the chat or mute yourself. Why do we measure outcomes? Why is this important?
See what's working and what's not working.
Yep.
Come on, y'all. Maggie, they normally like to talk.
I've been making them talk a lot today.
This is
See
great
how we
information.
serve the individuals.
There goes Penny in the chat. See how to better serve the individuals that we serve. Marissa says to help us make decisions going forward. Aloya says longevity. That's a good answer.
That is a really good answer. Yeah. Those are, see what isn't working and what is. Yes, exactly. So now we're kind of getting into the big part of the program, and you can go to the next slide. And this is we're going to look at the 3 different types of outcomes: the short-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and then long-term outcomes. Next slide, and we're going to talk about short-term outcomes specifically. So these are going to typically be the precursors to changes in behavior. So this part of the program evaluates the learning that happens, any awareness, knowledge, and skills gained, attitudes changed, opinions changed, aspirations, motivations. Think about the programs that you're working on. What are some short-term outcomes that you're looking at?
Recovery skills, life skills.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not necessarily seeing change yet, but we're providing this knowledge, this skill set. This is what yes, Crystal says, becoming open to change. Exactly. We're setting the stage, we're building that foundation. How can we get to the next step? And then next slide. These are the intermediate outcomes, and these are changes in behavior or environment. So maybe this is actions done, changes in behavior, practice or decision making, policy changes or social action. And what might this look like in your own programs?
Learning patience, education for our peers, interpersonal growth, planning, then observing. These are all great answers.
Yes, awesome. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk about these long-term outcomes, which are going to be changes in health status. So, and kind of circling back to what we talked about at the beginning, how everyone's success looks different. This might be that a peer has decided to go into treatment, or like Larissa mentioned, maybe someone's getting to spend time with their kid. And these are kind of those big changes in condition, social change, economic change, changes in health outcome. So that's just a big overview of process and outcome evaluation. And if you take one thing away from my part of this webinar, I want to just stress that evaluation is complex. It isn't easy, and it is like kind of you have to train your brain to think this way. You're all headed like right in the right direction. And I presented this information, I hope, in a way that helps you think about how you can start thinking about this in your own program, and how you can collect this data in a meaningful way in your own job, so that you might be able to take it to a boss and get more funding, or be able to show your community the outcomes and the impact that you're making. I do encourage you, if this is something that you're interested in, to reach out for help, to have an outside evaluator come in. There's tons of resources as well to learn a little bit more about evaluation and what this might look like. I sent some resources to Larissa and Jeremy, and they're at the end of these slides. There's just some more information about evaluation and different tools. And my email's on there. If you have any questions that you want to send an email, reach out. But if we go to the next slide, I'm happy to answer any questions over the past few minutes of information that I've shared, if anyone has any questions that I can answer.
Aloya says in the chat that he wants to start a health portal navigation for clients. Okay.
All
Does
right, well,
anybody have any questions?
Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been basically typing in all the things that come to my head when I'm hearing all the different topics and seeing the progression of it. And that's what I came up with, you know, health portals for navigating because what we have, we do a lot of testing. We're trying to get people in the prep. We're working on, HIV, HIV and recovery, and all this stuff is in our vision and mission statement. The one thing about it is that we have a tendency of going to our providers and forgetting all of the stuff, or maybe losing all the questions that we wrote down. So I think that it would help if they knew how to use the portal because every doctor is hooked to the clinic and the clinic is hooked to a portal and you can I always ask questions on the portal. So by the time I do see my doctor, he already has the information that I need and we can discuss it. And I don't spend as much time trying to figure things out.
Yeah, I mean, I also think having all of the information in one place for the people that you're working with and for yourself from an evaluation and data collection standpoint is really, I mean, it would be very helpful. If we could all have all of our data in one place, that would be great. And if it's an interface that your program participants and yourself, you can engage in at the same time, the amount of like data sharing, information sharing, and collection that you could do would be fantastic.
And I believe, good question, Aloysius, or statement rather. Ashley has a question in the chat. What is the best way to see the differences from one time frame to another?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think consistent data collection is a great way to show growth. Doing chat, so it depends on what the metric is that you're looking for growth in. But doing some sort of survey for participants to understand whatever you're trying to evaluate at the beginning of their time in the program, maybe a midpoint and then an exit is a great way to show growth. Or if you're looking to show growth internally in your own program, kind of doing those tracking metrics, the number of webinars that you put on, does that change from year to year? The number of program participants that you have is a great way to look at those different timeframes. I know, for example, I'll talk about the AUD program. We do every 4 months, we do kind of a brief report on, it asks a number of questions. It looks at like the audit tool. And so doing kind of those periodic data collections, and Jeremy puts all of the data into a spreadsheet, and then I go through and analyze that data every 4 months. So you can see that growth in those 4-month increments. So having some sort of like plan like that can really help you see growth from one time frame to the other, and picking what time frame is reasonable for you. So we just had a conversation in our meeting with Jeremy. That's a lot of work to get that information. So 4 months is or every 3 months, so 4 times a year. Every 3 months, you can see some significant growth, but then it's also not too overwhelming for anybody to do. So those are some things to consider. And thanks for that question.
I think Michael Mintz was next.
Hey, thank you, Maggie, for taking out the time today. It's more of a comment than a question, to where I think it's real good. I meant with the nonprofit that I work for, that we I don't know if people are familiar with CARF, the accrediting body for rehabilitation facilities. So I think that it's real great. I mean, they have 1 year and 3 year accreditations, and it's just bringing an outside entity to make sure that you're meeting the standards that are, once you set the bar, and it keeps you accountable, versus, hey man, we're doing such a great job. I mean, internally, to where everybody thinks they're doing a great job, but are you really uh doing a great job of having somebody else who has no skin in the game, but to actually see that that needs are being met. That's the only skin in the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And no bias or no loyalty to that. So I think that that's a important part of the collection data, and to all those things, to where, hey man, if you don't record it, it doesn't happen. It's good for money. It's good for predicting outcomes, so you can change and see the progress. I mean, so I think it's a helpful tool all around. I wish everybody utilize that more, because I mean we numbers are important. So thank you.
I agree. I wish everyone did it more as well. I also think, kind of circling back to the conversation we had at the beginning, everyone measures success differently. And if we don't have these benchmarks to base our success off of, we might be biased because we say, yeah, we're doing our job. We exist. But you're not tracking, you're not looking at benchmarks and metrics. And that's kind of what we have come to accept as success, and making sure that we're not falling victim to our own bias.
And I think Aloysius.
Yeah, when you were talking, Maggie, when you were talking about the outcome, and I was thinking about, what we do here is we would start them off with a questionnaire. And then that same questionnaire will come 6 months later. It reminded me of even my own recovery. I came in, I was destitute, I was homeless, and all of this. And then 6 months later, I'm living in a recovery house, going to meetings, things like that. So you actually see the progress, or, how well your program is working by just asking the same question, like every 6 months for like maybe a year. That they also have grants out there too that give you a gift card if you do that. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think thank you all for your great participation. I'm going to hand it back to Larissa and Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for being on and agreeing to do this and sharing all that information. I know I even learned a lot from that. So thank you, Maggie. And awesome participation, great questions. This really is just the beginning of the conversation. Like Maggie said, fitting it all within 45 minutes is just a tiny snippet of evaluation as a whole. So as more questions come up, please reach out to other cares, reach out to us. We'll have more contact information at the end. But I think it's really important that we start having these conversations for how do us as cares, people working in peer support, how do we start thinking about evaluation? Because and being able to talk about it afterwards. So being able to present the work that we're doing in a really meaningful way and know that it's objective, the information that we're presenting. Then also just being able to help more people, being able to fill in those gaps. That's what it's really about anyways. Being able to fill in those gaps, making sure that we're serving everybody that is looking for support, regardless of cultural differences, regardless of housing status, regardless of any of that. Are we really hitting the mark on that? Did you want to add anything in here too, Jeremy?
Yeah, I would say that, reiterate that what Maggie just shared was a very small snippet of evaluation. when I first started meeting with our Emory team and they presented the logic model, I was mortified by what I saw. It was so technical and so scary. It filled up an 8x11 piece of paper with little bubbles, color coded all the way across with arrows going to all different kinds. Like, I was terrified when I saw that logic model that they had created, and so much thought went into it. And what I learned on the other side of that was tremendous. Then the next freak out was when I found out that all the data collection that was required, I was responsible for collecting and documenting and ensuring that they got the information that they needed. So that sent me into kind of a tailspin of creating tools and methods of collection so that we could actually get the information that was required to, meet the needs of the evaluation. But having that team available to us has been tremendous, because the things that they think of and the things that they do as part of evaluation and research, it's really, 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 really complicated. And it's really good to have a team that has the ability to guide you in a professional way. And I'd say when it comes down to it, the primary role of a peer recovery coach is to provide great peer support. But taking documentation and data collection seriously is just as important, because that may very well be what determines the future of peer support, the funding that we receive, the programs that we expand, and the recognition of its efficacy and the effect and impact that it has in our communities and in our hospital systems. So without that documentation, we don't have anything to show what our work is. So supporting our peers is 100% our primary role, but taking data and collection and documentation very, very seriously. I would impress upon you, all of you guys, that is just as important as the support that we provide to the peers in order to have better outcomes for the future of peer support programs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have one last question here. So after getting all this information, going over the overview of the importance of data collection and evaluation, and then hearing what Maggie shared, what can you do within your organization as it relates to all this information? So you can put it in the chat or raise your hand or mute yourself.
Right now, we do the bare minimum of data collection, and we recognize the importance of it, and seeing this motivates me to be more thorough in that, and to find out how we can do a good evaluation in order to provide better services.
Yeah, it can be kind of scary at first. Like, we've been in this process of struggling to do it. And I was like Jeremy too. I saw a logic model and my brain just went completely blank. And so like, it's this huge amount of information, but when it's broken out into pieces and we have a plan on how to even create a plan, an evaluation plan, it really makes it easier when we break it down into small boxes. I see Ashley said to make sure that we get the best outcome for our peers. Yes, I mean, our organization and our cause, absolutely. Kathy said, keep data, document. Yep. Paul said, apply this vital information. Teresa said, be more involved in my community and surrounding. Absolutely. Crystal said, we collect a tiny bit of data, but have not put any into any spreadsheet or format or analysis program yet. All right. So that provides, hopefully this is a starting point to at least get the ball rolling on that process of putting it somewhere.
I just want to say, if it's okay, just like y'all, a handful of years ago when I started doing Access Point, which like started out of parking lots in RCOs, literally, I hated data collection. I did not understand it. I thought it was dumb. I thought it like got in the way of the work. I'm like not lying. Like I hated it. and the total and complete 360 to where I'm at now. And the first time that I had money to hire someone was a data collection position. And it was hands down the best thing that could have happened, because it gave us so much like information to work with. And it proved that what we were doing was like worth it, because that's the way that funders look at it. And that, you know, we got our first grant. I was in a building for like 6 months before the state came to us and asked us if we were willing to grow our services to other counties. And that absolutely would not have happened had I not had the data to show how we were killing it. And I just really want to like put that in there, because it might seem stupid. It seems stupid to me, but like, oof, like put some energy into it. And like, even if it doesn't shock you, it will shock the people around you and shock the people. And like, we need to diversify our funding, right? Like whether you're wherever that you're from, like local money, county money, state money, whatever, but like get your numbers straight. I mean, and I say that only from experience, because 3 years ago, I would have been sitting here like this. I probably wouldn't have even been sitting here, because I would have thought this was a stupid one. I'm just saying, but I want to throw that in there because this is everything. And if you're not good at data, get someone who is, or learn, you know. Anyway, I really want to throw that in there, but thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Riley. And that leads us to our next thing, ask for help. Like for us, we just don't have the capacity or even the know-how to do all of it ourselves. So we've started including in any new grant that we write, we include funding for evaluation. And if we can't evaluate it, then we're probably not going to take on the new peer services. So our process with that started with calling up local universities. Kennesaw State University was our first. They have an awesome CRC, Collegiate Recovery Center there. So we had a couple people that were in recovery working on it's either their master's or PhD at that time, that agreed to do a research project on our emergency department. And that was like our start to realize, oh, people actually care about this stuff and want to help and will do this work for free. As far as research goes, they'll do it for free. And then we had a couple doctorate of nursing students do it. And we'd get on the calls with them. It would be a team of us from GCSA and then their researchers. And we'd have a call after the call of all of our GCSA staff trying to figure out what it was that they were saying, because it seemed so far over our head at the time. And we get off and we're like, what just happened there? So then we talk about it afterwards and like decipher what happened. And so doing that over and over again, it helped us also realize that we need to keep the focus on evaluation and not just research. And that's where Maggie and her team came in. So reach out for help. Local universities, they have students that need to do it for credit. And then there's also places like the Emory Centers that can do it. If you can get a grant to do it, include it in your next grant proposal, include some funding for it, and they can provide some professional help. So we're a little short on time, but if there are any key takeaways, something you thought was really helpful about this in particular that you want to share, just drop it in the chat box there. And then here's a list of resources. We can also send these out, or if you want to just take your phone and take a screenshot of this. The first one is Emory Centers. That's where Maggie works. They've been doing our evaluation. We're doing a couple other projects with them. And then a list of other places to find more information. I don't know if you want to share anything about these other resources, Maggie?
Yeah, I can do a quick. My notes are also under there. These are some of my favorite sites. So CDC's evaluation framework, I shared that today. That's a great place to start if evaluation is brand new to you. They have great documents, and that's pretty much the standard accepted practice. The American Evaluation Association has a lot of resources, a lot of webinars, blog posts, that sort of thing. Atlanta Area Evaluation Association. If you want to get evaluation into your workplace, I think this is a great place to start. I am a member and I work on their pro bono evaluation team, and they offer 3 months. It's really quick. not anywhere near the work that I do every day with Larissa and Jeremy, but they could give you kind of like a foot in the door, maybe to prove to your boss that this is something, or to prove to your organization, or to get that start on that for some grant funding. They do that once a year. So you can check out their website, and they also have like webinars and stuff like that. Evaluate some of my favorite webinars. I attend all of their webinars just for my own learning. And then We All Count. It's not evaluation specific. They do have some evaluation work, but it's on how we can collect data in a way that's equitable. That came up a few times, and I think that's really important. So that's a good resource for that as well. And my email, I think, is on the next slide. If you want more resources, please email me, because I have all of the resources and I love to share like evaluation tips and tricks.
And I know we're running out of time, but I just want to plug Emory. Emory has been an amazing team to work with, just like Maggie showing up for us today. This is not part of our evaluation. They're very helpful. They go above and beyond. The research and the effort and the thoughtfulness that they put into every single thing that we do for evaluation has been phenomenal. So thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Emory. And if you can use Emory, they are amazing. We really appreciate everything, and we've learned so much from them. So my email is also there if you have questions. And that's it. That's all I've got. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here today. We'll pass it back to DJ.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Jeremy. Y'all did a great job. Again, everybody, as far as the information for this webinar, if you want to keep track of it for when you submit your CEUs in a couple months now, it's the October webinar. The title is Data Collection. And as far as the facilitators, just to keep it simple, you could put GCSA and Emory Centers. Okay, and I will throw that in the chat. But with that being said, everybody have a great weekend and stay safe. Wear your jacket, it's getting cold.
Thank you.